Welcome back, everybody. We took a little break, and now we're back for some fun. I'm Nick Gonsman. Rob Crane is my counterpart in crime, and today we are going over using Augmented for remote learning, which, as we know, is for a lot of reasons become more requested. So we wanted to cover some of our thoughts and ideas on that. Just some housekeeping stuff. Again, we post all of these sessions on our study hall area on YouTube and our website. So if you're looking for future events or if you are looking to get caught up on previous events, that's where you can go grab it. We are moving to an every other week schedule for the rest of 2020. So Rob and I knocked heads together a couple weeks ago, and we're able to get a schedule for that. So here is what we have coming up for the rest of the year. Don't forget that our friends over at Hog will also start up at 1 o'clock Eastern. Today is 10 tips and tools to be a better Hog programmer. So I feel like I should be attending that as well. But again, we thank you for all of your ideas and thoughts on new sessions. Feel free to send those over, and we'll see what we can do to fit them in. I think the next one that we'll talk about really quickly is the September 3rd one, which is sort of the wrap-up session. Our illustrious Rob has been running some using Augmented sessions to get you up to date on how to use Augmented, the functionality of it. And so we're kind of coming to a close on that. So Rob, do you want to talk briefly about what that session is just going to feel like?
Yeah, so that will be more of a come in with questions. I'd like to do kind of an AMA format as part of it. So we'll set that up ahead of time and post a link for everyone to find where they can submit questions. So anything that we either haven't covered or you feel like we didn't cover it well enough and just need some clarification, happy to cover those things. We may also cover some other 3.0 features that aren't necessarily Augmented specific, that we haven't touched on at all through any of this. So that'll be the kind of the final using Augmented series session. I think we've been doing that series for about 2 years now, it feels.
It feels like, yeah. So. two and a half maybe.
Yeah.
So, well, very good. And I'm going to say something that I'm sure immediately regret. But we have a release candidate build for EOS 3.0. And if everything holds and we get through the next week or so, we plan to release EOS 3.0 to the website on August 31st. So that will mean that wrap-up session will be on release code, Rob.
Woo.
Let's just
and we'll immediately find things that we have to fix.
Well, exactly. So fingers crossed, everybody. Things are looking good. The team has been working really, really hard to get everything in good shape for release. And if that continues over the next week, then we'll be able to release August 31st. So stay tuned for more information about that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and go on to the topic for today, which is Augmented for remote learning. So I kind of I didn't want to do a slide that was like what we're not going to cover, because I thought that was like not very great. This isn't a how-to of Augmented, right? And again, Rob has done a really great job of presenting a lot of that stuff. We've got some new materials coming out that we'll talk about in a bit when we release 3.0. But really what we want to cover today is if you were an educator, what are some of the advantages and challenges with using visualization software, including Augmented, which is built into EOS 3.0, and what are some of the things that you might run into as you're considering how to interact with students that you can't be in the theater with. So, we want to cover some of our thoughts. I hope that this is a bit more conversational We have some breaks for questions and thoughts. If you have ideas, we want to post those back to the Q&A so that other people can see them, so please feel free to share those. But this is not really meant as a how-to. That also means that it's probably going to only be about 45 minutes to an hour of our content, so that we can leave a lot of room for questions and discussion. This is something that we're obviously all transitioning into. It's a very difficult time for educators and for students, and for us as well. So we're trying to make the best of it, and this is sort of the collection of ideas that we put together, and things that you need to think about if you're going to look at relying on augmented or kind of really any visualizer to supplement in real life learning. So, you know, going over learning objectives for students, right? Some of the controllable properties of light, maybe some of the types of projects and shows that they might work on remotely. We're going to discuss kind of briefly some of the light labs and base show files, things that you can hand over to students that may assist them, and sort of the build your own approach, which is great. And then there's obviously a lot of options for deployment and what the implications of those various means are. So we'll pop through that today. So, you know, one of the fundamental things that we talk about is really when we're talking to students that are new to light. And unfortunately, you know, there just is really no replacement for studying light on objects, on fabric, on skin, how it wraps, how color affects different dyes and things like that. So as we look to sort of replace those things, you know, I kind of, my mind went back to some of my design training, which is talking about sort of some of the fundamental characteristics of light, the controllable properties of light that we discuss and learn. And you know, there's like, depending on which book you read, there are 3 of these or 95 of these. These were the ones that I sort of picked out as things to discuss for today. And I think that a visualizer can help in certain degrees with you know, directionality, the angle of the light, intensity, both how it looks on objects, on people, and relative to other sources, color rendering, texture through the beam, including edge, but also edge on its own. Focus meaning like less pan and tilt, but more where to direct an audience's attention, and then time, transitions, motion, that sort of thing. So visualizers can help some of that, right? We can certainly cue a show in previs. We can certainly get really good ideas of how that stuff's going to go, but we have some limitations. And the biggest limitation revolves around the fact that we are still using an RGB monitor to represent things that are really complex spectral and reflective surfaces. So at the end of the day, I think when you're assessing how students learn light through a visualizer, this is it, right? This is the biggest challenge that I think there's no replacing it. There's no getting around to it. As I'm sure many of you are aware, there's a lot of different monitor to monitor discrepancies, right? You know, consumer grade monitors that are built into laptops that are standalone can range from a fully video calibrated $5,000 display all the way down to an $89 Walmart. I got it because it was cheap and that's what I need output. So every single display brand, and even within the same brand, you're going to have different gamut capabilities with your RGB. There's different nit potentials between sources. So that may mean that some are brighter than others. Some deal with contrast better or worse than others. Things like OLED technology versus LED backlit, right? There's for as many brands and models as there are of monitors, there are an equal amount of discrepancies, right? And so when you're doing something like reviewing work from multiple students, it's important to remember that they may not be experiencing the same thing on their display as you are on your display. When you're doing things like sharing across multiple monitors, you know, all of the people may not experience that look the same. And that's just the monitor. You know, there's all sorts of other components like graphic settings in not just user configurable things like saturation, brightness on the monitor, also in your operating system, also in Augmented. So this is all to say that this is fairly stacked against us for fair comparison of learning light. And I think that it's just something that you're going to have to keep in mind and know with your expectations as, you know, we're no longer all in the same room looking at the same thing. So that's a big challenge. The other things that kind of came to my mind related to hardware technology is there's a lot of things that you might want to remind students to control. You know, a lot of monitors now do auto warming in order to save our eyesight and our sleep. So depending on when they're working on their projects, if they don't have those settings disabled, you know, a middle of the day presentation versus a 2 a.m. I'm trying to finish it before it's due work session. None of us have ever done that. You know, those are things that you have to be careful about. Things like auto brightness on laptops, true tone calibrations. Those are all things that can really affect what we're talking about. And you know, having the student be aware of all of the things that their machine automatically changes on them through time of day and location is worth discussing, I think, if you expect reasonable results. And as I was putting this together, it made me realize, like, that's something all of us should be thinking about too, as we start to more rely on these sorts of tools for our professional career. You know, it's something that our technology is trying to help us, but that may give us varying results. Before I dive into some of the controllable properties, did you have any thoughts on that, Rob, of just technology?
No, I think you said it perfectly. Like, it's all stacked against us. You know, there's no one's going to learn to be, you know, have that eye of a lighting designer by staring at a monitor. Like, at some point, they're going to have to be in the real space with the real fixtures, which I don't think anyone's arguing against that. Just, it's good to say it out loud so we all remember, like, oh yeah, that this is all a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And Matt, of course, says that there should be X7 array monitors. Absolutely. You know,
or X8. I mean,
or X8 now.
Why stop at 7? Yeah.
You give us your order, and I'm sure we can put a price to something. So, yeah, but it is interesting. You know, I've been waiting for maybe a 4 or 5 color display to come along. You know, that's at the consumer level for a long time, and I wonder if we'll ever get there. You know, I don't know. So going back to sort of the controllable properties of light, how can a visualizer help some of these things? And I just did, and I'm happy to have feedback from Rob or anybody else, but I did sort of a green is good, red is bad, yellow and orange are in the middle rating of sort of what a visualizer can help a student understand from my point of view. So directionality is a green, right? You know, you can see how shadows interact and how the directionality of a light source can affect a subject, and I think that it's pretty successful for things like that. When we start to talk about intensity, I gave it an orange just because I think you can look at relative intensity in a scene pretty well, but that intensity is never going to translate to what the stage levels look like, right? And I think we've talked about this in other sessions where you can use any visualizer to set levels and record those levels into your cue. but then you take that cue onto the real equipment, and those relative levels are going to be different, particularly with things like incandescent equipment. Intensity relative to the moment in time, with the audience's eyes adjusting to what has been happening for the past 5 or 10 minutes. Those are all things that a monitor does okay with, but I don't think can ever explain the full story. Color is bad for all the reasons we talked about, and you're going to know that it's blue or indigo or red, but when we talk about full spectrum light bouncing off of complex reflective surfaces, those nuances that designers really dig into, blue's going to be blue, but the complexity that we look for out of lighting designers, their understanding, visualizers aren't a really good way to do that for all the stuff we just talked about. Texture, I think it does pretty darn good, right? You're going to be able to see patterns projected. You're going to be able to see how breakups work. Things like starting to fuzz stuff out, source 4s, that sort of chromatic aberration you get around pattern edges. That sort of stuff doesn't really exist in all visualizers. So, you can do some really interesting things with just an open white source 4 and a gobo and get a lot of color and rendering out of it. A visualizer, and at least augmented, certainly isn't going to carry those details. Edge, again, I think it is, more in the orange. It's fine. You can see soft and you can see sharp, but the nuances of edge, which a lot of designers use for complexity, aren't prevalent as well. Focus, so far as where to direct an audience's attention, I think visualizers are pretty successful. Again, and that goes back to sort of relative intensity and some basic color, right? I think those principles can be taught pretty well through visualization software. And again, I think green light to time and motion. Visualizers are good at showing us fades and the speed at which things progress. They're also good at showing motion, like moving lights, effects, things like that. So I think that's stuff to consider and know where a visualizer is strong and is not. Your opinions may vary on this, I think. But did you have any other thoughts, Rob, before we
Yeah, I'll chime in. I think it's good to consider how you're using the visualizer for what purpose. Like, are we just using it for a class project where it's never going to be put on a real stage? Because if that's the case, you can make it look as perfect and as good as you possibly can with errant disregard for what that would translate to on a real stage. Intensity is an easy one to look at. You might have something at 10 next to something at full, which looks good on the visualizer, whereas on your real stage, you probably wouldn't even notice the fixture at 10%. I kind of liken this to photo calls. If anyone out there has done a photo call where you turn on, the light cue that you've used in the show and looked great in the show, but then you point a camera at it and it looks terrible, or it's blown out, or it's not there. So it's okay in that example to make changes to the light cue just for the photo, because you're trying to duplicate what it looks like to an audience there. So I think it's kind of the same thing here. If you are using this as a true sort of pre-visualizer where it is going to move onto a stage or a studio, then it's kind of a different method of, I'm not trying to get it perfect. I'm trying to get the ideas there so that I can tweak when I get onto my real set.
Yeah, and I think talking about that with students is really important. That this, if this is their first foray into learning lighting, they're a first or second semester design student, and they're just starting to dig into this. Being very clear that is very different from what will look like on stage is, I think, just a good thing to sort of beat home with them, because we as people that have been looking at lighting for 20 or 30 years as career professionals, we know that, but we forget to say it, I think. So, and as Leo mentioned, we've been talking kind of about like looking at light with our eyes compared to a visualizer, and Leo brings up the point of like working in a TV or video environment. Absolutely, completely different. you have to make accommodations for what that camera system needs to see. So I think that that's a point well made. So, one of the things that I kind of think about in the back of my mind if I were being asked to cover this challenge is an affordable and known set of supplemental things that students can buy and explore some of those properties with exercises in real space, right? So the idea that, and this is of course like a goofy minimalist idea, but the idea that you could have something like a flashlight, a swatch book, and known swatches, swatches that are the same person to person. I think that you can start to develop exercises that say, okay, take R91 and look at this fabric swatch, and let's discuss your thoughts on that. I think the important part is consistency across students, right? Specifying like, go buy this swatch book from this manufacturer, use this model of a flashlight so that everybody's seeing the same thing, kind of like avoiding the issues that we talked about with monitors. So I think that, this could be a supplement to a visualizer to be like, hey, we can't quite see all this as well on our screen. Let's go over and do like a mini light lab. It's impractical to ship every kid like 15 Source 4s to their home. I just don't see that happening. So consider how a small, affordable kit that is predictable can help fill in those gaps for you. And I also put in here for flashlights, be careful of LED sources just because they're not full spectrum. And gel reacts very differently on an LED source than it does on an incandescent source. I'm sure all of you know that, but it's worth being said. And that's why I say maybe specify a model that, go to Amazon or whatever, buy this very specific thing so that you can get consistent results. Any other questions or thoughts from everybody before we kind of move on to some of the types of projects we have ideas for? Anything to wrap up, Rob, or you want to? We can move on as well.
We've hit everything that's come in so far. So great. Yeah, I think we can keep going.
Okay. The other thing that we had sort of discussed, so kind of knowing the barriers that visualization and augmented offer, I guess I didn't say one of the big pros with augmented in particular, which is kind of for the first time, people are gonna, you have access to free visualization software that's fully capable of the lighting system in a way that's been harder previously. And certainly from a theatrical standpoint, we've always had to use third-party viz software. So I think that's a huge pro, is like, doesn't cost any money for students to get into this, which I know has been a barrier of entry in the past. So so you've decided that you're using some viz for some part of your education. We kind of bounced around some ideas for types of projects that are useful. So kind of design-based, if you're training designers, the idea of doing things like compositions only, again, using more of a light lab setup where they can visually or virtually set up a composition. We'll talk about sort of ways to submit later, but that may be a very easy thing for them to set up, screenshot, and just submit to an LMS or something like that. So compositions are one way to talk design. Short queuing sequences, so more 3 to 10 queue type of moment exploration is something that can be good for design, because then you start to introduce time. Again, I think that time is something that visualizers help with a lot when we can't be in the space. And that's something that we've used visualizers for a long time, is getting sort of timing stuff figured out when we know we're going to need to compensate for other things that the viz can't help with in the real space. And then all the way up to a fully realized virtual design. I think that I've heard a lot of programs that aren't going to produce this year. Is there an ability to have a scenic designer draft a 3D model of what their scenery is going to be, bring that into Augmented as a model, bring it into Vectorworks, have the lighting designer draft on top of it, get their first, set of paperwork done, bring that into Augmented, and then start writing cues and things like that. I think in particular with our tie-in with Vectorworks, a lot of programs use Vectorworks to teach their students. I think that if the scenic department is on board in providing some of that stuff, that you can get pretty far in doing a paper design and be able to cue it in a way that maybe you couldn't before. So I think that's kind of opened up with EOS and 3.0 and making it a little bit easier. The other thing that I put in here is pre-show prep file. One of the things we're seeing a lot more people, and actually Rob has a session coming up about this, is kind of base files and stuff. But as our rigs get more and more intelligent, every fixture is color changing, more and more of our fixtures are movable. I think it's important for students to understand that making choices ahead of time can save them time and tech. So doing things like pre-recording color palettes that fit into the palette or the mood of the piece are going to be important. Setting up snapshots and things like that. So another thing that designers could be doing is prepping some of those building blocks for pre-tech, and I think that's an interesting project. Similarly, programmer-based projects. I know design, sometimes you have to program as well, but if you have a program that focuses more on programmers exclusively, data creation exercises are going to get so much easier now with Augmented. And that's really kind of the point. I think that little bar actually is why Augmented came into existence, was to help programmers primarily be better at editing their data, right? So setting up exercises that pre-create palettes and effects and macros, the fact that you can really understand what an effect is going to look like on stage instead of just reading the tea leaves of all the numbers and hoping it looks good. Again, with timing and all those things that a visualizer is good at bringing to the table, I think those exercises are very, very valuable for programmers and even higher level designers, more advanced students there. Editing exercises, one of the things that I constantly talk about with students is tracking and just move fade behavior. And I think that doing editing exercises and seeing how that stuff happens, again, now with a visual component, is a good set of exercises to help them learn that in a practical way. One of the ideas, that we kind of talked about in coming up with this session was sort of setting up a designer and a programmer together. If you have the ability to have one student in a light lab, for example, maybe then you're just sharing a video feed back to a designer and they're able to either via FaceTime or an audio signal see a video of the stage and then communicate back to the programmer almost like they're in the same room. It would be an interesting exercise to have those students work together. And again, programmers pre-prepping a show file is huge, and advanced students teaching them how to merge and bring in information is good. That sort of stuff, again, relies less on the visualizer side of it, but as we look at more things for students to do that aren't in a space, they're useful skills to have. And then there's some electration-based stuff that Rob had thoughts on that I'll toss it over.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this morning. So obviously this is going to also be programmer-based. We don't, we can't take our wrench into Augmented. We haven't programmed in stuck shutters or anything like that yet. But I was just thinking of back 100 years ago when I was a TA in college, I would come up with these exercises for my budding young electricians who were like a year younger than me. But they would, we'd do things like we'd have a fixture without a lamp in it, and then a fixture where the hot wire had been disconnected from the plug. And then as part of the training of these lab students, they'd have to go through and figure out what was wrong with each fixture. So we can also sort of do these types of exercises in augmented. And some of you may have found some of these in the Hamilton show file already. There's some sneaky ones stuck in there. But as I was making my list, I realized, I was like, oh, some of these things that are very common to be incorrect in real life, we can't replicate in augmented. So like if a DMX address is off by 1 in real life, it'll, the colors will act strangely and intensity may not work, things like that. But we can't do that in augmented. It's always going to work, and it's designed that way. But we could, just some thoughts off the top of my head, where we could do things like we could close all the shutters on a fixture and have a student go into augmented and try to figure out why that light's not coming on. We could proportion it down to 0. We could hide the beam. We can invert, pan, and tilt. So there's some things we can do as a exercise to learn how to troubleshoot things that aren't working, some of which translate to real life, like the shutters being in, for example, and some of which are much more augmented specific. But I think the main takeaway was think of things that aren't just design based or programmer based. Like there's also a way to use this to help your future or student electricians as well.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing, Rob, because I think that troubleshooting is less about do these 5 steps and more about critical thinking and being able to envision those 5 steps and think about things linearly. And your points of like kind of messing some stuff up in the setup reinforces those ideas, even when you can't be in a physical space and deal with real trouble. So very good. I think some of the other things that are worth exploring, and this will all kind of have a bit of a tight bow on the end of it. But again, I think depth of project is worth considering. You're going to have students that are just learning what light is and what its properties are, and you're going to have potentially students that are nearly ready to go out and start a career, a professional career. So I think in thinking about what levels of students you have, are you doing things that are like one-off exercises, or are you doing things that build? And going back to sort of the design idea, I think it's now easier than ever to sort of say, okay, a paper project is going to include, paper projects back in my day, 100 years ago, paper projects kind of ended at like, okay, you're ready to walk into tech. You had your concepts, you had your design research, you had all your paperwork ready. You had a cue list with scene breakdowns and all sorts of other things. But you really didn't write, you didn't put light to paper, as it were. I think this allows for you to continue through that and let students respond to the script and the work. You can put some choreography in some of these files now with movable scenic objects. So having people appear and move and things like that for some blocking, either you can provide that as an instructor or another department could provide that perhaps. And so I think there's a lot more ability for a student to get closer to a full stage project, but that may take a lot more time. So we'll talk a little bit more about slicing some of these things up in a bit, but I think having ideas of where your students are at and whether you just want them to go in and do something like a composition versus a full paper project is worth considering. And this will determine how much work you have to do as the instructor, right? Which is, do you provide a show file and how much of it's built? We talk a little bit about this in a second with Rob and I's experience. But think about things like the model that they're going to be using, the lighting rig, and what I call building block collateral, which is things like color palettes, focus palettes, gobos, all that other stuff. How far along do you want them to be before they start? How much do you expect them to complete on their own? Again, an advanced student may want to be given a 3D Vectorworks model file and say, okay, you need to start your light plot, and then you need to take it all the way through to augmented and get some cues written. So I think thinking about, we have to think a lot more, I think, about how far the instructor has to take them before we can launch them off. And you aren't alone in this, right? What other things can other departments provide? Can scenery provide 2D drawings or 3D models? Can someone from either another department or facilities provide a 3D model of the space, or does that need to be created? You know, can sound department respond with the music for the lighting designer to respond to? Can the acting side of the faculty respond with some blocking that can be put in? I think there's a lot of ability to still be collaborative in this tool, and Augmented is kind of where that stuff gets focused. So again, nothing that is prescriptive, but some ideas to get some more feedback into the system. And one of the things as you're going through these depth of projects is always going to be sort of render quality. We'll talk more about this, but you know, Augmented is a gaming quality piece of software, and so we have lots of different settings inside that allow you to set the quality of that output, and that is also based on the hardware that can support it. So if you're talking about something like a composition, which is just a still photo, you may require your students to do really high detailed rendering. And Augmented, we keep saying it's not a visualizer. It does pretty darn good. You know, with the right settings on the right hardware, we've seen some really good stuff. And again, I think testament to David Arch and the Hamilton project. Those cues look really, really good. But if you're doing something that's more time-based and you need to make sure that the cues aren't steppy or stuttery or that effects are running in proper time, you may decide to allow less quality of rendering to see those things. So just keep in mind the limitations of the hardware. Lightboards are made to keep up with all this stuff in the space. A student's, you know, 2013 MacBook may not be as able to keep up with it. So keep that in mind. And I think that took me to the next thought of, you know, how are you going to support your students? And I just, these are stock images of, I think I Google searched frustrated student. But, you know, I think at the end of the day, there's going to be a higher expectation on you to be able to help them with getting the software up and going. And as we'll talk about in a bit, ETC is trying to provide a lot of those resources. But I think, you know, you're going to have to be a bit more of an expert in this stuff than maybe you were before, because they're going to have to get graded on some of this stuff, right? And one of the things to think about is if you are providing a base show file, you know, how much does having something like on the drop-down magic sheet, a button that just says reset, you know, and it like resets all of your views, it puts everything back to a known state, it sets the augment and render settings back to more nominal values, so that if they get lost in sort of a wormhole, Eos is big, complicated, professional grade software. Introductory students may have a bit harder of a time left to their own devices. So what can you do to help them come back to a known location so you can help support them on that stuff? You know, again, sort of waxing more philosophically, the requirement and the challenge in providing a base show file is something that has all of the work done right up until the student needs to start. And I'll just, you know, the other slide that I put in here is like, Rob and I are the ones who write the education materials, mostly for the ETC education team, with the help of Ellen White as well. And I think our challenge, the whole group of us, is that as much as you plan, running through it multiple times will help you catch stuff that like, oh gosh, a student will run into this and they have no idea what that thing is when you provide it for them. And you know, we can talk about this right now going through our augmented education stuff that we're building. You just kind of got to run through it a bunch of times and fill in the gaps. You know, not every student's going to be able to dive in. I think a lot of these tools, you need to know one thing in order for the other thing to work, but how do you know that thing until there's a lot of kind of cross-pollination. it's very hard to fill in the gaps. So challenge accepted, I hope. Probably any other thoughts on that?
No, just thinking of an example. We had a comment on one of our YouTube videos recently on the first using augmented session, and their comment, and rightfully so, was this isn't really starting from scratch. You're starting from a complete show file, and it's that sort of chicken and the egg thing. So we said, yes, so the first thing we want to learn is how to navigate around the space, but it's really hard to navigate around the space if it's just a floor, because then you don't know where you're looking. So it's, it's the challenge of giving enough information so they can learn what you want them to learn, but they have to know how to use that information first. So it's definitely a balancing act, which we run into constantly.
Yeah. And you never get it right the first time, as we run into constantly. So yeah, it was just something that I wanted to bring up as a challenge, because I think it puts a bigger burden on a professor. And look, I know a lot of times educators will build tools that they can use semester to semester, year to year, so that they're not trying to reinvent the wheel every year. This is all brand new, right? And this is something that I think will take a lot of initial creation. But I think, like a lot of the other tools you've built for yourself over the years and you use, that, you're not going to have to, if you've got 4 venues on campus or whatever, you're only going to have to 3D draft those once, hopefully, right? Those are things that are time consuming up front, but will pay dividends for a lot of years. So keep that in mind, similar to other things you may have done. I just want to bring this up. John mentions that another thing that's a good exercise is stage managers calling cues for a virtual project with a board op. I think that's great, right? That's for everybody. Stage management gets an advantage out of that, because now they can actually see how things are reacting. It's not quite as great as having actors who often do their own thing for stage managers to need to react to. But I think that's a really good other project to bring in yet another part of people to help out. So cool. I'm going to pop through a few more things, and then we can open it up if there are any other questions. If you've got stuff, we've got a couple in the queue that are responses. We'll get to them. But throw them at our way if you get a chance. Light labs and base files. So I think this is sort of the key, right? If you're going to be using augmented to educate students at any level, aside from the most advanced user who's about to get shoved out on their own and hopefully make a career out of this, having some level of a base file is going to be beneficial to the student. And again, it's you meeting them at the expectation of where you want them to start. ETC, we have created, Lowell Alcott, actually, who's the product manager for Augmented, created a series of files which are really, really useful. This one is amazing. It is a show file, so it's still in Eos, still a little bit of technical expertise that's needed. But Lowell did a really good job of creating a user environment on a magic sheet that allows you to have the controller magic sheet open, which are the bottom 2 images, and the augmented window open, which are the top 2 images, and have a virtual light lab, in the same way we'd have a small black boxy space to just look at light on objects. This light lab file is able to be downloaded from the website that I listed right there. It allows you to move fixtures to different locations. There's color palettes that are built in. There's intensity buttons. There's gobos to try. There's different edges and different beam angles. So I think that this is really, really useful because, you have a bunch of different options that are accessible to almost anybody, right? If they can click a mouse or they can touch a screen, they're going to be able to interact with this. There's also a nice little, like we talked about a minute ago, a little start here on the drop-down thing that kind of resets everything back to 1, gets you to a known state. So this is really, really good for beginners. But I also think it's really flexible for advanced people. Lowell,
and I'll just chime in and just say Lowell did a really good job, and this kind of response to Matthew's comment about it could be, for new students, could be really hard on Nomad to figure out all the keyboard shortcuts, and because you're learning EOS as well as Augmented. But in this file that Lowell created, you really don't need to know anything about EOS to make it work, from the get-go. It's really intuitive, and he set up all the buttons where you just kind of click and stuff happens. So while it is working those EOS shortcuts under the hood, it's really easy for a student to start.
Yeah, absolutely. The other files, these are models with light plots hung in focus and no other content. So these are for maybe medium to advanced users. You can give them, there's a concert venue, there's a proscenium demo venue, and there's a fashion show venue, which is sort of 2 prosceniums on a runway. Rob has been using a lot of these videos previously. So these are great resources to just download and play with. You don't have to take the work of building up a venue and a rig, but they can start queuing and doing stuff immediately. You can also start to dissect these, and I think I say this later on. But these are show files. Download them and start making them your own. If you want to remove the fixtures and give the students a light plot so that they have to hang the lights in Augmented, if you want to have them import the model or whatever, all of that stuff is available, and these assets already exist. So again, that gives you as an educator a little bit of a leg up on some basic materials. It also gives you the flexibility to kind of make it your own, which I think is good for people. The coming soon thing, again, we're hoping to release in about a week and a half, 2 weeks. And as soon as we release, we are doing our last edits to an education workbook for Mind the Gap. So that's a screenshot of Mind the Gap in Augmented. We already shot videos. Luckily, in February, Rob and I were at the studio and got all that stuff done. So the editing team has been putting all that together. So there will be a workbook. There will be a full video learning series. And we're also going to release a full expert topic show file. And that will include the Augmented model and the rig. But because we're using it for a lot of our other expert topics classes, there's also a whole ton of other neat stuff that's in there. So those of you that have seen some of our other webinars, that's the file that I use kind of often with the programming magic sheet that's in it. Those magic sheets will be in there, a bunch of macros, palettes, just things for you to see kind of how we and other programmers have kind of set stuff up, and for you to take it apart and disassemble it and play with it, and merge it into your own work. We'll also include a Vectorworks file, and then some of the in-between intermediate files between Vectorworks and Augmented, like colladas and A3D files. So we've been working hard on this for, again, the past year, knowing that Augmented was on its way, and now we just need to do the final little bit to get it out the door to you. So so that's coming, and I think that'll be a huge help for people that want to really dig into all of the Augmented stuff in particular. So.
And Nick, we have a question about how much this costs. How much does all this cost, Nick?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Rob. For the low price of, all of this is free. EOS 3.0 is a free upgrade to any EOS device that is Windows 7 or better. If you have more questions about that, we can talk about it in the Q&A. All of the training materials are free, just like we've always done. So. Yeah, download it, use it, play with it, and the training materials, we're not trying to keep this stuff secret, so go to. So as soon as we get it up, it'll be yours. Thank you. Good question. Again, we give you a lot of starting points, but I think a lot of you are going to want to eventually make your own base file with things that are relevant to your venues, including architecture, maybe some, you do a paper project every year, so you do the House of Blue Leaves model that, the students use every semester or whatever. I think that, again, over time, you'll be able to launch off and develop a lot of your own collateral. If you want a starting point, I've said this in the section, but take ours and make it your own. It's at least a jumping off point. Maybe for the first semester or two, that's what you want to do because of time constraints. Maybe you want to take time to build up stuff that's more relevant to the spaces on your campus and the projects that you do. I think that we like to give you starting points, but I'm excited, frankly, to see sort of what kinds of projects educators are going to develop. So, did you have any broader thoughts on kind of base files or?
I mean, like you said, we are going to do a whole session on that in about a month here. But no, I think this is, and you mentioned this already. I think this is something that the first time you sit down to create it, it'll take a chunk of time, but a lot of that with all base files will be useful down the line.
Yeah, and I think again, putting in the work up front and as inventory changes in your venue, all that kind of stuff. Those will be more incremental changes. So cool. We've got a little question break. I've seen a few that have come in. The first was, are we able to request instrumentation that may not be available in the current libraries? Yes. So in order to get 3.0 out, the team surveyed a bunch of people and kind of got like the top 60, 75 fixtures and put those in. You're able to patch any fixture type, but we may use a generic model. But we give you some places to customize the physics of that device so that they work the way the real device does. It may just not look the same in augmented as it does in reality. Somebody on a thread yesterday was talking about house lights that they had to patch Fresnels because they didn't look like house lights. We don't have every fixture type ever. That will be increasing as we continue to release software, as we need more time to get all those things done. As you have requests, there's currently a place in the beta forum for new fixture requests that will remain available at release. So you can go out and request fixtures that are maybe missing the model information that you have. So those are going to be more available. Lynn,
just to add on that, I'm not sure if this was a question or not, but just in the interest of thoroughness. So Nick is talking about the fixture type in the model. The main fixture library is more about the DMX mapping. So new lighting fixtures come out every week, constantly with different things. So the fixture library is still updated very regularly with those types of things, and then adding that into the model is kind of a second step. So there's, I don't know how many fixtures are in the library, thousands, tens of thousands probably. And then the 50 to 75 Nick is talking about are physical models in augmented. So again, we can use any of those thousands of fixtures in augmented, no problem, but they may look different than they really do.
Yeah, well said, sir. The next question that came in that I was going to move on to, Lynn asked what a collada file is. It's a good question. Collada is a 3D graphical file. That's a standard. So a lot of programs that are capable of drafting in 3D will allow you to export a collada file. Augmented has the ability to import over 50 different file types. We like collada because collada has kind of the most information of any graphics type. So it remembers dimensions and rotations and what's called a base point and offsets and all that other stuff. So collada is our recommended file type. Vectorworks can export collada. I believe that SketchUp can export collada. There's a lot of different graphic softwares that can export collada. But if you encounter a graphic software that doesn't, there's probably another file format that we accept that we can bring in. So all of that will be a part of the documentation when we are releasing. And then obviously if you have questions or thoughts, the forums will be a great place to deal with that. And you can get help through those folks. Let me see what else came in really quick.
I like this question. It's kind of peek behind the curtain a little bit.
Yeah.
So a little off topic, but John asked, he said he'd be interested to know how we do some of the tech in our seminars, our education videos, such as seeing the output of internal touchscreens and touch presses that are highlighted. This is not, not recommended, not supported, but our video team has this secret, it's not secret, but they have this capture software that they are able to install on the console we're filming on, the TI. They install this separate software on the TI that basically fools the console into thinking it has 4 monitors instead of 2, but they're duplicated, and so we send those 2 virtual monitors out to record. So that's how we capture all of that. And every time we power it down and power it up, the video guys curse a little bit because they have to like reset all this stuff to make it get back to normal.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. This desk is not in production use, right? And that's why we get away with it. Is the video team cracks open the hood and does some stuff that we wouldn't recommend doing, because for a show file or for a show run, that software can have adverse results on the operation of the desk. So, but we know that desk isn't running a show, so we let them do it.
And then the touch presses, those are actually all added after the fact with software, video editing software. So those are just manually added. The software doesn't capture where we're touching on the screen. The video guys just put that in afterwards.
Yeah, and I'll say that our video team is just amazing.
They're incredible.
Rob and I actually look like we know what we're doing in those videos, and if you saw the raw footage, you would wonder why we even have our jobs. They're phenomenal. They're great. They make us look good, and they bring good stuff to you. So speaking of education, like, those folks are rock stars. So kudos to them. I saw one come through, which is Carl. Hi, Carl. Is there a plan for a collateral repository that users can contribute directly to? A good question. We've gotten this asked a bunch before. The fact of the matter is there's actually some legal issues with that, so far as putting up a space where people can share things that maybe aren't theirs. We, for now, are kind of standing away from that. It is something that we brought up very early on in development. If there is something that a user starts up that becomes popular, giddy up. I think for now, we are standing away from that. I am interested to see, one of the things that I've kind of wondered is if augmented base show files, or at least 3D augmentable models, will become a part of venue packages, tech packages. If you're going into a touring venue or if you're going in to rent a space, does that just become a part of that package now? I think it's interesting, and I think we'll see what kind of uptake that is as the industry gets back into full swing. But yeah, for now we're not getting to that. But one day, maybe.
And then as far as he also asked about Magic Sheet components. So there is some of that already on the Facebook group. I'm sure there's other places that people share those as well out there on the internet that can be found. But again, we don't host any of those either. And then
yeah, good point.
I like this question of, oh, I lost it. It's about capture. A lot of questions have come in. No, I can't.
Yeah, that's great.
What are the advantages or disadvantages of using Augmented as a remote learning tool versus the ETC capture file?
I'm assuming you want me to cover that based on how you. Yeah, I think that I think they are both advantageous, right? What's nice about capture files, the capture files actually always light up, right? And I think one of the things that we will, we say that Augmented is, and this is one really big difference is it's not visualization, because as soon as you go into blind, Augmented goes into blind with you. You can set it to look at the pending queue, not the current queue. There's staging mode, right? So there's a ton of really interesting tools that by having a 3D viz environment in the desk, we don't have to always be showing output. So Capture always listens to whatever the desk is outputting. So I think that that's a useful thing. I also think that Capture is higher quality, right? So Capture is a visualizer. They have spent a lot of time and a lot of effort making things look really, really good. Their color rendering is a bit better than ours. They deal with things like incidental lighting, and I think they deal with reflective surfaces. You know, they deal with shadows better than we do. They deal with edges and things a little bit better. So I think you're always going to have a much more accurate render. I like to say that if I were trying to convince at a professional level other members of a creative team, I was trying to sell them on an idea from a lighting standpoint, I would still want to use a visualizer like Capture or like Converse. So there's that. But I also think that, you know, if you don't need that stuff and programming is more of what you're after or learning EOS, that getting Capture set up doesn't have to be worth that kind of hassle. Capture can be hard to run on the same machine with an EOS platform. We always try and recommend, if you can, 2 machines because it'll be a little bit better. You know, augmenting can open up as a tab in EOS. So I think there are advantages and disadvantages to both. I think, you know, for the time being, for Education Center, for EOS, we still plan to teach our levels 1 through 4 classes with the Capture machine attached to the desk. If you've ever been to one of our classes, we give you a console and a laptop with Capture running. That's going to stay the same. And I think that, you know, we'll see where everything goes, right? But the Capture is always going to be responding to what the desk is outputting, not internal to the desk like Augmented is. I hope that makes sense. So,
some of these, I wonder if some of these we should wait. I know you have a little bit more of your prepared comments, and then we can kind of get into more discussion, because there's a lot of good stuff coming in. But why don't we kind of do a roundtable at the end? So,
yeah, sounds good. Cool. So let's take it on home. Deployment. So you've decided you're using this. You've got your projects. You've got your files. I guess at some point the kids need to learn this stuff, right? So I came across this tagline for this section, which is resources, resources, resources. And these are 3 separate resources. What are the resources of you as an educator, both time-wise, facility-wise, IT-wise? What are the resources of your students? So do they have access to campus, labs, things like that? And what are the resources of students' personal technology, right? And I think that's a big consideration is, you know, what do they have? I have sitting next to me a $2,500 Alienware gaming laptop. I think it's really unreasonable to expect every student will come to university with that sort of stuff, right? So those are things that we want to consider at every step when we talk about deployment. The first level of deployment is save and submit, right? This is what we see with term papers, and we're quite comfortable with this. So there are a bunch of different ways that I think you can go about how to save and submit. Show files, right? You can have them create you a show file. And what's nice, we were actually talking about this with the developers yesterday. We had to get together with the actual people that code the software. And, you know, when tech services needs an additional help, the developers actually get in and help troubleshoot some of this stuff for real show files. We've always called it reading the tea leaves. Like, they can look at numbers, but like, what's it actually supposed to look like? And particularly when you talk about like effects and things like that, how are things actually supposed to work? Or we can't see why it's not working. Now we have something where they can program something, send it to us, and we can actually look at it, how it's supposed to function. I think that's the exact same parallel as an educator, is now you can take a show file and open up an augmented tab and see how it's supposed to play back without being on a real rig. And that's a kind of exciting way for save and submit, which we've not really ever been able to do before. As we talked about before, screen captures or compositions are a really easy way to save and submit, right? All print screen, send it in an email, post it up to an LMS. Easy, easy, easy. Video captures are also another way, right? You can just have the student play back locally, do a video capture for something like a music project or something. They can take a couple of takes if they need to get comfortable with pacing and hitting go at the right time or whatever they need to do, and away you go. Some of the trouble is that the screen capture and the video capture aren't native tools of EOS 3.0. And I, kind of put like a little sad face to my next slide. It's something we want to get to. It will absolutely make it easier for these sorts of activities, but it was something that we weren't able to tackle and get 3.0 out the door in a reasonable time, or as reasonable as it's been, right? So I expect that those are the sorts of things that you'll probably see in future builds. It's stuff we've discussed, and I think it will benefit people. But right now, the student is going to have to use a third-party screen or video capture suite in order to get that stuff buttoned up and over to you. So just be aware and know that that's a limitation of the software currently. First and foremost, the other branch of deployment, think about your resources, and your resources. But screen sharing is another way to do this. One of the things that Rob and I have run into for these calls and these presentations that we've been doing is the computer's capacity to serve as both a video conference and run Augmented, right? Augmented is incredibly taxing graphically on a machine, depending on where your biz settings are. Now, if you have 10 students and a professor, all with their videos running, what is that doing to a local computer? And again, what is the student realistically expected to have the capability of their machine run? Be aware of that doing things like a real-time presentation with a Zoom meeting may not be as possible, depending on the complexity of it. So just be aware and be cognizant that you may have to punt into something different. And again, what are you grading? If the quality of the model, the nuances of the shadow and the detail of the rendering are important to you, then that's a different video setting in Augmented than real-time playback. Maybe you can even do just stick beams, turn off all the beams of light in the rendering if you're looking at seeing how effects chase or how transitions work or marking, depending on how advanced your users are. So keep those things in mind. Even something as simple as a Zoom meeting can have some complexity to it if you're expecting real-time sharing from your students. Think about your 3 resources as we look at remote access. This is something that, and we'll end on this, and so, bring in your questions. But the short of it is we've been getting a lot of questions about like remote access to a lighting system since this has begun. I'll take you through some stuff that we have talked about pretty publicly. I will also say that all of this is user supported. ETC does not have a ETC created and supported means to remotely access a lighting system. If you go all the way back to the very first study hall session that we did, where we talked about lighting networks, the important thing about lighting networks and lighting board access is we never want it connected to the internet, period. And that's still the case. You don't want to put your ion onto the IT network at your university and have it accessible to all of the different things that are there. So there are some things that can be done that ETC says, yeah, this is okay. It's not going to hurt your current system, but you can't call phone support and say, I'm at home and I can't log into my ion, right? So I think that's a really, really big thing to understand, is that if you were going to deploy these things, you need to be confident or have a team that's confident in supporting it if it breaks down. ETC can't be responsible for that. So that caveat being said, there's 2 branches of remote access. And there is remote screen sharing control, and there's remote native control. So let's break those two down separately really quickly. Remote screen sharing control is the ability to use your favorite or maybe your IT required screen sharing software and remotely connect it to a machine that's running Nomad. This could be three kinds of deployments. The first is, and I think really important to students, especially if you have students that are unable to afford higher level technology, in order to provide equal access to students to higher quality technology, you may want to be able to, work in setting up a computer lab computer that has high quality graphics, high RAM, all sorts of other kind of kick-ass specs. Put a Nomad dongle on it and allow remote control of that computer from home. Basically what that means is the only thing that the local computer and the internet are having to deal with are sending video from that remote computer back to where the person is using it, and sending keyboard and mouse instructions to the device. So it's very thin so far as the internet is concerned. It's very reliable, and there are a lot of programs that you or your IT team can choose to deploy. And then anybody can kind of log into it. Once, if you use TeamViewer, for example, there may be a TeamViewer on that machine, and everybody that needs different credentials can log in. It can maybe track time that you're logged in. I think some of them allow scheduling, things like that. So that's a great way that, regardless of how you're doing it, bringing equity to all of your students so far as the quality of hardware they're using, and going all the way back to the beginning of our presentation, the accessibility to same hardware, same capabilities. This may be a really great way to ensure that. The second sort of thing, and the third as well, are controlling a real space, right? I've gotten a lot of questions about, like, well, I want to set up my light lab, but we're not allowed in it, so I want students to remotely control it, and I'll send them a video feed. Sure, there's two ways that you can do this. Both require a computer with two network interfaces. I guess that's not entirely true. I'll come back to that. The first example is if you have a computer in a light lab with a Nomad dongle and a gadget, for example, that is outputting to the rig. If you're using a gadget, you really only need one network port, and that's the port that goes to the internet, right? That can be same thing, screen share, somebody remotely logs into that computer, but instead of just doing work on that computer, now that device is also outputting to the rig. So you can send video back to the student, and you can even pop in and help with ideas and notes and things like that. It's a really great way to use a remote space. Don't forget the caveat of, like, just like Viz software, you're using an RGB video camera, which is going over the internet, which is translating to an RGB monitor. It's good to have a real lighting space. It's not going to be like real light. So know those caveats. The second way to do it, and something that you do need two network adapters on the same machine for, is running a computer with a console that's already in the space. So let's say you have something like a lot of gateways. You're turning your proscenium theater, your big theater, into your remote light lab. You can't just connect an ion to the internet. Again, we said, no, we're not doing that, we're not supporting that, we don't like that, it's bad. What you can do is put a computer that has two separate network adapters onto the lighting network with one network port, have another network port go to the internet, make sure you have a Nomad dongle so that you can be a client on that network, and that's just it. Now what you do is you put that Nomad as a client to the primary, and if you want to put it in the same user, if you want to do some screen sharing or mirroring, you can do that. And now that computer with the two network adapters is bridging the internet and your control. So you're still doing the same idea where you're remotely controlling just that computer, but you're relying on the hardware that's already in your space in order to deal with things like networked dimmer racks, networked gateways, data distribution in the space, things like that. So doable. It requires some knowledge, right? This is not something that if you're not comfortable with networking and screen sharing, you may not want to take this approach on. Because again, I think it goes back to, at the end of the day, you're going to have to be the one to support it. If you are a bit technologically savvy, this is highly advantageous because they're easy to deploy relative to other solutions. Screen sharing software works great through the internet, right? So the internet doesn't chew up things like multi-console protocol. We're not trying to send that stuff over the internet. It allows, again, access for top-line hardware for students, which they may not have access to on their own. So all useful stuff. Going back to Rob's thing, if you're educating electricians, you've got a 101 technology class. Also doing the screen sharing into a lighting network, that third option will allow you to run concert locally and be able to look at things like dimmer racks, gateways, all those sorts of fun things. So that's pretty cool. The last sort of section is the deployment under native control. This is highly complicated. This usually requires an IT deployment. And basically what it requires is creating a virtual network through the internet that is the same as all the components connected via copper in the same theater. You need to deploy things like VPNs and LANs or VLANs in order to get this to function. There is no ETC support for this, right? Like, this is you calling up your IT department and saying, I need you to create a virtual network between wherever the student is sitting and wherever the light lab is or the theater is. This is not an all-size-fits-all. However, it recreates the experience of being in the theater from a network standpoint. Doable, complex. If you have more questions, Rob and I are both FPCs. Every region has an FPC across the globe. Your FPC is a technical expert and can help you get answers if you're looking for this kind of stuff. So our website gives contact information, or Rob and I can help you always put it in the right place. Those are the options for deployment. I had some other random thoughts, and then we'll just open it up for the next 20, 30 minutes, however long it takes to answer questions. Things that kind of like came into my head that didn't have a place. I love the idea of if some students are allowed on campus or if a single student is allowed in a space, the idea of a programmer and designer session virtually, because it almost duplicates the real designer programmer experience. If the programmer can be in the light lab, then again, all the student needs is remote video feeds, and that's easy stuff. And the designer can call queuing through Zoom or FaceTime or whatever. The other thing that we're already seeing is that as you're looking to incorporate some of this stuff into your curriculum, we've already seen some universities start and then have to stop again because of increased infections. So just a thought for the back of your brain, what's your preparedness to go kind of instantly from an in-person thing to a remote learning thing? Do you have a little bit of a backup plan that remote learning can jump in, even if you're doing some in-person classes? It's the unfortunate reality of where we may be right now. That just popped into my head as something to keep in the back of your minds as well. So, Rob, do you have anything else about remote deployment before we kind of just open it up to everybody?
No, I think the main thing, and you hit on this a few times, is it's be confident in your networking skills before you kind of dive into this. I did link to your entertainment networking study hall video in the comments. We had a couple questions about NICs and things. So I answered those there, and then also put a link to that. So it's kind of a long one. I think it's 2.5 hours or 3 hours long.
It's very long.
But it's there's a lot of information packed in there. So for those of you who may have kind of glossed over for the last few slides, that's a really good place to start to bone up on those sort of that knowledge on entertainment networking and how that works. I don't think you talked too much about remote access in that session specifically. But
no, we actually avoided it.
But it's, everything in that session is certainly worth learning before trying to dive into all this. So.
Yeah, and I think that's, obviously this wasn't anything anyone was expecting to happen to the world. So the top slide of that presentation says that the way that we design lighting infrastructures is to be kind of fail-safe, right? And so the reason why we don't like to put infrastructures on the internet or have remote access to them generally is we don't want something to happen in the middle of a show, right? And have our lights tip over. Now that this has been thrust upon us, we have done remote access for things like TV studios and other things in the past, but generally it's been one-off. And generally we have said exactly the same thing, which is like, this is complicated, you deal with it. We can't support the connection, right? We'll support the individual pieces, but if they can't talk to each other, you have to figure that out. And a lot of these TV networks and big facilities have gigantic IT infrastructures that know how to set that up. Your university may be able to help with that, but they may not, or be unwilling to. Ask questions of them. If you're interested, ask questions of us. If we need to get our smart people on the phone with your smart people and get us out of the middle of it, we can do that too. Just let us know.
So getting.
Yeah.
I was just going to go to the phone lines here.
Go to the phone lines.
This one came in a few minutes ago. Any tips for setting up programming stations at home for students on a budget? I think that's a very germane question right now.
Absolutely. If you're trying to get programming stations where students are trying to get keystrokes in, keyboard shortcuts can be a little clunky. I get that. I don't even know all the keyboard shortcuts of Eos because I don't use a keyboard. I use a board. X keys are a really affordable way to do it. X keys are like 150 or 160 bucks US, I think. So, they're not cheap, but they're more affordable than something like an Eos programming wing. And they get you pretty close to an Eos and keyboard layout. On our website, we have a template that you can download for the XK60, which gets you the file. You can just word into the X keys, and then it'll be up and running. You can make your own labels. We have a little template that's there that's like a PDF fill-in template. But we also, through our swag store, have stickers. I think they're 10 or 15 bucks. But they are the stickers that are really nice and have both pages labeled on them and match that template. So for 200 bucks, a student can have a really nice keyboard setup that they can take with them for the rest of their career. I still carry my X keys on planes to work on the well, not anymore. But X keys are incredibly portable. They're just USB devices. They're great, and it's something that the student isn't going to throw away when they leave. So that might be something worth looking at. But honestly, students can do most of what they need with keyboard shortcuts. It's more clunky, it's slower, but that's a good start.
The other one I would add in there is if they have a mobile device or tablet, Touch OSC is a free program that you have to kind of set up yourself. There's a lot of templates and things online you can find that you can configure to be a programming surface of infinite customization. So you could have it be key buttons or encoders or anything else. So that's a free option that assuming you have the tablet to put it on or phone. A free option that requires some work to get it up and running. There's also our remote program, which you can run on a tablet or a phone. The ARFR, IRFR. There's a couple of third-party programs as well that are under $100 for the software. And then I'll just mention our Light Hack kit in our swag store, which is, I believe, $99 still, which allows you to build a encoder box that's compatible with any console or Nomad. So there's a few kind of roll your own options. If anyone's not on the EOS programmers, what is it, EOS family?
EOS family programmers Facebook page. Yeah, it's a really long name.
ETC EOS family console programmers Facebook group. This comes up a lot. So then folks are always showing photos of their setup and kind of explaining the pieces they use to create it, of varying costs. Some are very budget friendly, and some are not. So
and I think
the gamut is on there.
There's another great thing that, again, if you have students that are, and I say this because I was this student, if you have a nerdy student who wants to dive in, even beyond something that's your comfort level as an educator, the EOS programmers page is great because there are a lot of nerdy people there that will help them. And there's a thing called OSC, or Open Sound Control, that EOS implements, which is a kind of a easy to read programming language that facilitates a lot of these, like, you can make your own hardware on an Arduino and have it communicate with the software. So if you've got kids that are like computer programmers / theater nerds, those are the kind of projects that they may really like to dig into. And there's places for them to get, assistance, so you don't feel like you're burdened with having to know all that stuff as well. I would like to, I'll bring, Matt makes a good point. Some of the remote desktop softwares seem to disable the Nomad dongle from being detected. He brings up RDP, for instance. That is something that's a very good point, that sometimes they will disable any locally connected USB devices in order to facilitate connecting remotely. You will need to do some testing, and your mileage will vary, and read the specs, and yada, yada, yada. What else? While you look for another question, Rob, I'm just going to read out. One of our friendly beta moderators is hanging out, and they said, just so far as interesting metrics for stuff at the end of July, the augmented library has 3,434 released parameters, so different things, 931 manufacturers, 8,810 gobos, 8,810 gels, 10,953 gobos, 2,556 wheels, so different chip and gobo wheels, and 35,981 fixtures. So that is, I'm going to go ahead and let that be public. So it's not comprehensive, but we're still working on it. So thank you.
So tens of thousands was not an exaggeration.
Yeah.
Good job. Here's a question. What will the process for the release be? Usual email, etc., notice when it's available, and do we request the keycaps and get the documentation?
Yeah, absolutely. So the web team right now is working on getting all that stuff spun up. We're going to do, there will be some information on the main page when we release. So just by going to the ETC website, you'll get one of the little banners up top that they affectionately call hero graphics, which I love. The product pages will be updated. 3.0 will be listed as the currently released software. There's an EOS 3.0 release video that is separate from the education files, right? So just like we do with every major release, we put out a 10 to 15 minute video that Rob and I embarrassingly star in, that as well, just to get you used to some of the features. There will be an email blast that will go out to people if you're subscribed. And yes, there is a keycap change with EOS 3.0. Scroll lock becomes stage. So if you would like to get that keycap, there will be a place on the website that you can go request that. You'll need a console serial number, and then you'll be good to go. So I think it will all be pretty self-explanatory. Our marketing team's doing a great job getting all that stuff like ready to go, so that hopefully the software stays happy, that we'll just turn that switch on sometime on the 31st and we'll be good to go. Good question.
Here's a really great question from Michelle. She asks, I've not looked at the Rock and Roll Light Lab file, although this applies to any show file. Can we run sound and do time-based work in Augmented, so time code?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually did a show control webinar, what feels like 7 years ago. I'm sure it was maybe 2 months ago. It's been a while, but it's called Show Control Time Code. I would recommend going to watch that video. Absolutely. We don't limit the offline software, so you can. You'll need a gateway, I think, is the issue, right, Rob? For SMPTE, you need some ETC hardware to get that onto
your system.
Into the system. So it does require. Yeah, go ahead.
That does require a dongle too, correct, to receive time code? I actually don't remember off the top of my head. I would assume it does.
Maybe somebody else has an answer to that. I don't remember off the top of my head, to be honest. I would say have one ready just in case. That would be my answer.
And I'm looking up the link for that video, so I'll post that in just a second here.
Oh, perfect. Scott says you can do MIDI without a dongle.
Oh.
MIDI time code. So, good question. Go check out the other session.
I've got it here.
Great. While you're looking that up, I'll dig out another question. Great. Lynn asks, I have an EOS on campus. I'm at home with my laptop. I work in Vectorworks. What do I download to get started with Augmented? Augmented is just a feature of EOS 3.0, Lynn. So right now it's in beta. If you're interested in getting it immediately, you can go on to our user forums, which is community.etcconnect.com, and that will, I'll put that in there as well, and that will allow you to sign up for the beta forums. But we're really, really close to release. So as we just mentioned, that we hope to go live on August 31st, which means you'll just be able to go to the regular website and download it. So download EOS 3.0, install it like you would previous offline versions onto your laptop, and you'll be able to go. Again, we're going to release education content as well. So if you're looking to just get started with digging into Augmented, we have some of our study hall videos. We have our videos of the day that you can look at, but we're going to be coming up with videos and everything when we release. So you should be able to start there as well.
John says, probably worth mentioning that a remote-controlled light lab should be staffed for fire safety and not run in the middle of the night when the building is closed. So certainly any university or building policies should obviously be followed. We're just talking about the actual mechanism of connecting into your light lab. But yes, that is an excellent point.
Yeah, good point. Very good point. Safety first. Anne asks what program we recommend for video capture. I don't do video capture on my work machine, so I don't have one, to be honest. If anybody else has anything that they use, I know there's some free stuff. I know there's all the way up to Noah says OSB. Thank you, Noah. So yeah, I think anything that runs on your system, Mac or PC, will probably be fine. And there are a lot of free things. So I would imagine that if you're doing this to grade a student's work, that you don't need a lot of advanced features. So recommending that they use a free one. However, recommending the same one to all students might be important, just from compatibility issues, right? Like making sure that that the file that you're going to receive is going to be readable. Sorry, OBS. I will make these available
So that makes sense that OBS does video capture, and OBS is free.
Matt also says that Mac has it built in with QuickTime Player. It's not the greatest, but it's there. I feel about a lot of Windows default things. I think Windows is a video recorder. I've just never used it. I use, I've been a Photoshop user for forever. Even just to crop stuff, I use Photoshop. So certainly for screen sharing on Windows, just the standard snip tool, because that also copies it to your clipboard, which is really nice. Or a lot of keyboards have a print screen button. Alt print screen will capture just the window that you're focused on. Control print screen will capture all of your monitors. So I live by those keyboard tricks.
Speaking of multiple monitors, Janice mentions having a second monitor is really useful, which we didn't talk about on the student setup. But I would tend to agree with that. It's certainly not required. Lowell's Light Lab files actually set up to run on a single monitor really nicely. But in general, I think having one monitor that you can use, kind of dedicate to Augmented, and then another monitor that you can dedicate to your everything else, it's really nice, if nothing else. Not required, but certainly makes things easier.
Yeah, and I'm sure this will be a different setup for everybody, but almost the idea of having like a place that students can check out that maybe gets disinfected regularly, that is a 2 or 3 monitor setup that they can go in and reserve time on, will certainly make it easier, right? It's hard for every student to maybe do that at home though, because it gets expensive. I did just, several of you came up with other suggestions for video capture. I just sent those to the Q&A, so thank you for those. Jeff asks, when 3.0 is released, will that eliminate the choice of 3.0 versus earlier, like the beta is now? No. So one of the advantages of 3.0, one of the additional features, is that we can run 2.9 software, or we can run 3.0 software on the same machine. That includes PC, that includes Mac, that includes consoles. So when you install 3.0, it installs side by side. If you are on a Mac or a PC, obviously you don't want to run those 2 pieces of software at the same time. There be demons. But yeah, absolutely. If you're bebopping around, you need to edit a show file on your laptop in 3.0, and then you come across a venue that has something like an EOS Classic that can't upgrade to 3.0, you need to edit it in 2.9. Those will be able to be booted side by side. So I'm a PC person. I know that they are just 2 separate launchers, and I've added them to my start menu and all that. And long term, there will be patches to 2.9. So right now we are at 2.9.1. If there's new networking hardware or other major catastrophes that we need to address in the 2.9 branch, we have the ability to do that. So you can still upgrade to 2.9.x well after 3.0 is. However, 3.0 won't be cumulative. So 3.0 will be replaced by 3.1, will be replaced by 3.2. We're not going to give you like 40 versions of software. You have the before 3.0 era and the after 3.0 era. So good question, Jeff. Can I answer this next one, Rob? Did you have something?
Yeah, go for it.
When you install 3.0 on the master, will it automatically load all the RVIs and clients that were set to receive updates previously? Yes, Mark, that is correct. As long as they're set to update automatically, and as long as those devices can receive 3.0. So some RVIs, some ions, some elements are XP embedded as their operating system, and XP embedded things won't install EOS 3.0. So you'll need to make sure that those are 3.0 capable. The easiest way to tell is if you look on the back of the device. If it has 2 network ports, then it is a Windows 7 embedded machine, and it will take 3.0 very happily. If it's only one network port, then it will not. And some of those devices can be upgraded through repairs. So you would want to get the serial number of that device and call phone support, and they can tell you whether or not that device can be upgraded and how to do it. But it is a physical hardware upgrade to go from a Windows XP image up to a Windows 7 image. So good question.
Yes, while we're on that topic, Nick, since we've been beating this drum for quite a while, but just to say it one more time in case this might be the first time you've heard it, that hardware upgrade program will be ending at the end of March of 2021. So if you do have an XP-based console and you go to install 3.0 and realize, oh, I can't install this, I have to upgrade, the clock is ticking on the ability to upgrade that hardware. And if you have questions about that, reach out to us. We can help out or send you to your local FPC.
Yep, happy to. That seems to be all of the stuff. Are there any options for those also on budget? Are there, John, I think I'm understanding your question. Are there any options for those of us whose budgets have been decimated to upgrade our IONS to Windows 7? Yeah, the unfortunate part for us is, as Rob said, we have to close up this program at the end of the first quarter next year. That has to do with the fact that we bought the reason that all of this kind of happened is the manufacturer that gives us or sells us the base motherboards stopped making it. And so we did a lifetime buy of parts for the Windows 7 upgrade. Once those parts are gone, they're gone. And so we've projected that we will probably be out of those parts at the end of March. The truth is it may go faster. So I don't know what to tell you. That's kind of you got to buy it for it to happen. So maybe working with your facilities people to see if there's any magical place for an emergency repair or something like that. That might be worth doing. If you need something on letterhead from ETC, we've provided those to other venues before. Just reach out to Rob or I, and we can make sure you have something like that that says, here's the program, and here's its limitations. We're happy to help. So, Lynn, oh God, I can't believe I didn't mention this. This is a great question. Is there an augmented Vectorworks plugin? Yes, there is. There's two, in fact. We support Vectorworks 2019, and we support Vectorworks 2020. We are not able to support before 2019. That is a limitation of what we were able to accomplish. 2020 is a different plugin because Vectorworks changes some of their database structure, and so it's a different way for us to export stuff. So download those. They're available for Mac and PC, and we will keep maintaining those as Vectorworks continues to come out with new versions. We have a great partnership with them. We feel really strongly about it. If you do a bunch of work in Vectorworks, you shouldn't have to duplicate it to get it over to EOS. So that's working, and we expect it to get better and better.
And we did do a session on that recently. Here, I'll post a link to that one as well.
And I'll answer Ant's question while you do. Will the Vectorworks plugin be listed on the main page? Absolutely. Everything that is a part of EOS 3.0 will be public. The 3.0 beta forum will be closed, and then all that stuff will be out and officially released. So there will be lots of links and pointers to all that information. And as always, if you can't find something, just give us a call. Leo asks a quick little off-topic thing, which is any word on Q 2021? No word. We're seeing where the world is. So if we have anything that we're able to share, even like a save the date, if it's something we look at later on, we'll certainly put it out there. But nothing's being discussed right now because we don't know where things are. So, did you post that, Rob?
Yes, it's posted. Should be in the chat.
Jeff asks, will we be still saving under different file types to save file sizes? That's up to you. So the default file format will be A3D. So if you have no models in your A3D file, doesn't matter, it can be the same file size as an ESF2. If you do have model in there, then it will continue to take up that space, however much the model is. So yeah, you've got to be concerned about if you're saving 6-8 times a day, what does that do to all the hard drives on your system? People are going to be using File Manager a lot more. You know, I think something that people might be a good habit for people is to, during big breaks, like if you take lunch break, you know, end of day, to save an A3D file, right? Excuse me, an ESF3D file with all of your model information in the middle. But if you are saving on coffee breaks or intermittently and the model isn't changing, there's no reason for you to save all that data over and over again. So you could be saving as an ESF2 in the middle parts. It's going to be up to you based on the capabilities and the size of your file and the size of your system. Good question.
Nikki, there's a question about, are we doing, well, it's about show control webinars. Can you post your first slide, just that shows the dates of upcoming?
Oh, yeah.
I don't have to.
Yeah, we should have left it there. Yeah.
So here is the show control one that we did already, and there are 2 more. The real reason is I couldn't remember if there's 1 or 2 more coming up. So, but now I see this is 2. So. I think that was Michelle that asked that. So those are the dates for the upcoming show control ones. Thank you.
Yeah. And I talked a long time for Jeff to clarify, was it still going to be an option? Absolutely. You have 3 file save options. Go to town, know the limitations. So Scott asks, a good question for everybody to know. How do you figure out how large your hard drive is on your hardware? Is there an alert when it's getting full? So no, there is not an alert. I think that might be something that we end up adding later, just because people are going to run into this. I think we tell you that it's full. I don't think we give you a, hey, it's getting full error. So that might be something nice. And then the best place to find out the hard drive space on your hardware is to go into the file manager in the shell. And I think that'll give you that information. So, good question. Dennis asks if there's a plan to allow Augmented to export some form of drawing, and that the magic sheet is pretty basic. If you're looking for something that's similar to like a light plot, no, we're not doing that currently. I'm not sure what the future plans on that are, but it's not going to be for 3.0. Capture does that very well. They have a whole light plot side of things, obviously as does Vectorworks, right? So I would say that because we currently have pretty good communication between Vectorworks and Augmented in EOS, that may be, if you have access to Vectorworks software, that may be the best way to go about it. But yeah, we're not doing that currently, but a good question.
And our beta moderator points out there is a warning when your available space gets below 1.5 gig.
Hooray, it's
in the CIA. Great.
Very good.
Thank you, beta moderator.
Yeah, always cool. Cool. So I think that's kind of all the stuff that's rolled in. I'm interested to hear your feedback. You know, we think we know how this is going to get deployed for education. The truth is we have no idea. So I think as y'all start using this in your classrooms, remotely or otherwise, toss us some notes. Let us know how you're doing. Let us know if there's stuff that is working, things that frustrate you. EOS 3.0 and Augmented, right? They're just sort of the first step. And we have a lot of ideas and things, but your feedback is invaluable. So If you need help, if you need assistance, again, Rob and I are always here to help. So, yeah. Is there anything else that's kind of plopped in? Very good. Cool.
I think we're good. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Well, thanks, everybody. Take care of yourselves. We will see you in 2 weeks for the augmented wrap-up session. I don't know. It's a little early in New York for me to bring a beer to cheers, but we should cheers to a good long session. So thanks, everybody. We will see you then, and take care of yourselves. Take care.